Captain Holt, please come to the front immediately." The intercom crackled through the cabin, slicing the calm like a blade through cloth. Conversations died mid-sentence. 147 passengers lifted their heads from glowing screens and paper cups of coffee. Something was wrong in first class. A young flight attendant stood rigid near seat 2A, her hand trembling around a boarding manifest. Her name was Chloe Navarro, and in that moment, her voice carried both fear and judgment. "Sir, I'm asking you again. This ticket doesn't look right. You need to step out until we can verify your identity." The man in the seat did not move. He was tall, dark-skinned, impeccably dressed, eyes calm behind quiet intelligence. His name was Elias Grant. "I've shown you my ID, my ticket, and my patience," he said softly. "All three are valid." Phones lifted in unison. The first flash of a camera reflected in the cabin window. A passenger whispered, "Is she serious?" Another muttered, "She said he doesn't belong up here." The cabin grew still, air thick with the kind of tension that hums before a thunderstorm. Chloe took a small step forward, trying to sound firm. "Sir, if you continue to refuse, I'll have to call security." Elias looked at her the way still water looks at a thrown stone. His watch ticked faintly, 12 minutes before departure. "You already did," he said. The intercom buzzed again. "Captain Holt, we need you up front." Sophie Lang, a 25-year-old travel blogger sitting in row 4, had her phone tilted upward, camera live. "Something's going down in first class," she whispered to her audience. "He's not moving." By the time Captain Raymond Holt stepped through the curtain, tens of thousands of people would be watching Sophie's feed. But inside the cabin, time had slowed. The engines idled in a low growl. The lights dimmed slightly as ground crew signaled readiness. Holt was a veteran pilot, stoic, silver-haired, a man whose voice could calm storms. "Ms. Navarro," he said evenly, "report." "Passenger in 2A refuses to cooperate," Chloe said quickly. "He presented suspicious identification." Holt turned to Elias. "Sir?" Elias extended the boarding pass without a word. The captain studied it carefully. Name, barcode, seat, flight number, everything matched. "It appears to be valid," Holt murmured. Chloe's jaw tightened. "Captain, look at him. Does that really seem right to you?" Holt's brow furrowed. "Explain." She lowered her voice, but not enough. "People like him don't usually fly first class." The words hit like turbulence. The businessman in 1C shifted uncomfortably. Someone gasped. Sophie's camera caught the entire sentence. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "People like me," he repeated quietly, as if tasting the words before setting them down between them. Silence followed, the kind that makes metal groan. Holt glanced at the other passengers, phones glowing, eyes wide. Authority and fear wrestled behind his expression. "Ms. Navarro, that's enough. Please step aside." Chloe hesitated, heat rising behind her ears. "Captain, he's delaying our takeoff." Elias leaned back, composed. "You've delayed it by doubting me." The pilot crouched slightly, lowering his tone. "Sir, maybe we can discuss this at the gate." Elias shook his head once. "No, I will not step off this plane for someone else's assumption." The calmness in his voice carried more power than any shout could. A child asked aloud, "Mom, why are they mad at that man?" No one answered. Elias's phone buzzed once on the armrest. A brief message appeared. "Everything ready, sir. Just give the word." He turned the screen face down again. The captain straightened. radio crackling on his shoulder. Ground crew called for final boarding. He looked from Chloe's trembling hands to Elias's steady ones and felt something cold settle in his chest. "Ms. Navarro," Holt said, "prepare the cabin for departure. I'll resolve this." "Resolve it how?" she whispered. Elias looked at her gently, almost sadly. "By remembering that you can't judge a passenger by the ticket price or the color of their skin." The line struck with quiet precision. No one moved. Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came. From row 4, Sophie's live stream jumped from a few hundred viewers to 10,000. Comments scrolled across her screen faster than she could read them. "He's right. This is discrimination live. Keep recording." Elias turned his gaze toward the window. The reflection of his watch face shimmered against the glass, the second hand sweeping smoothly forward. 12 minutes to takeoff, and a lifetime of stories behind that stillness. He didn't yet know that before the hour ended, his name, his calm, and his refusal would ignite a national reckoning. Outside, the sun glinted across the tarmac. Inside, silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the kind of silence that waits for truth to speak. And somewhere deep in that waiting, the engines began to whisper. The cabin breathed in shallow waves, as if the whole plane had forgotten how to inhale. Captain Raymond Holt stood apace from seat 2A, weighing the silence the way a surgeon weighs a scalpel. Behind him, the curtain to the galley shifted with the movement of anxious crew. Ahead of him, phones watched like 100 unblinking eyes. "Ms. Navarro," he said at last, voice even, "prepare the cabin." Chloe Navarro didn't move. Her fingers pinched the manifest until the paper wrinkled. "Captain, if we let this go now, we set a precedent." He refused. "Refused what?" Elias Grant asked, soft enough that the question sounded like a courtesy. "To be smaller than your suspicion." A soft chime rolled through the plane as a luggage door sealed beneath their feet. On row 4, Sophie Lang murmured to her audience, "We're live. I don't know what's going to happen." Her camera hovered, steady now, the way a witness steadies their hands. Holt glanced at the boarding pass again. Name, flight, seat, everything aligned. Still, the situation had gathered a charge, like wool drawn to a spark. He tapped his shoulder radio. "Bridge, stand by." The reply crackled in a clipped whisper. The pilot had spent 2 decades mastering decisions. This one, somehow, carried more weight than storms or engine lights. "Sir," Holt said to Elias, "if we roll back from the gate, we can verify everything without an audience." "There's already an audience," Elias answered, his gaze flicking to the constellation of phones. "And I'm not the one who invited them." A seatbelt clicked. A businessman in 1C leaned into the aisle. "Some of us have connections," he said, impatience thinning his voice. "Can we not turn this into a spectacle?" Sophie didn't lower her camera. "Sometimes spectacle is the only language power understands," she whispered, mostly to herself, mostly to the people watching. Chloe drew a breath, straightened her shoulders, and reached for the interphone. "Security to the jet bridge," she said, and the words left her mouth before she tasted them. Several passengers flinched, as if the syllables themselves had mass. Elias's watch hand swept forward. 10 minutes before the scheduled pushback. He didn't check the time to hurry anyone. He checked it like a historian marking chapters. He looked at the captain with a thoughtful calm that made panic look unskilled. "When people are unsure, they lean on policy," he said. "But policy still has a face, Today it is yours. Two uniformed officers appeared at the front, Officer Dana Lee and Officer Adam Reyes. They entered without drama, the way rain enters a story by darkening a window first. Dana's eyes scanned the cabin, alert but not sharp. Adam's hand hovered near the zip ties at his belt, an old habit that didn't know when it was helpful. "Captain?" Dana asked. "What do you need?" Holt didn't answer right away. He saw Chloe's fixed stare, Elias's composed posture, the lenses watching from every angle. His instincts lifted two conflicting truths to the surface. The pilot is responsible for order, and the pilot is responsible for fairness. Only one of those had ever been written in a manual, and yet both were part of the same vow. "Sir," Adam said to Elias, "we're asking you to come with us to the gate voluntarily." Elias folded his hands on his lap. "If I stand now, I teach everyone watching that accusations outweigh evidence. I won't teach that lesson. Refusing to comply can be considered interference," Adam said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Interference is when someone prevents a safe flight," Elias replied. "Sitting quietly in the seat I purchased is not that." Chloe exhaled through her nose, a sound like a match that wouldn't strike. "He's been combative since he boarded." Elias tilted his head. "Describe combative." "You challenged crew authority. I asked for it to be used with care." The officer's eyes flicked to the captain. Holt felt the plane's skin around him, aluminum and rivets and expectation. Outside, a ground vehicle beeped as it reversed. Inside, time stacked like plates, one careful moment atop another. A soft buzz trembled in Holt's pocket. The caller ID on his handset flashed, "Operations." He stepped half a pace toward the galley and answered. A calm voice, measured and urgent, filled his ear. "Captain Holt, we're monitoring a live broadcast originating from your cabin. Resolve quietly. Avoid removal unless there's a safety threat." He glanced back at 2A. "Understood," he said, and ended the call. When he turned, Elias had not moved. He still looked like a man who understood that stillness can be armor when used correctly. "Ms. Navarro," Holt said, careful now, "we will not escalate without cause." Chloe swallowed. "What do you call this?" "A misunderstanding," Holt replied, "that is rapidly learning to speak louder than we are." Sophie spoke into her phone, not quite a whisper anymore. "He said it's a misunderstanding. The internet won't think so." Adam inched forward. "Sir, last chance." Elias looked up at him with a kind of sadness that didn't need words. "Officer, may I ask you something first?" Adam hesitated. "Go ahead." "How many times have you escorted a quiet passenger from a premium cabin because a crew member said they didn't belong there? Not for shouting, not for threats, just for existing in a seat." Adam's answer faltered. "I don't keep count." "Your body does," Elias said. "That's what makes this moment heavy." Dana's gaze softened by a degree. It was not agreement, it was recognition. She had seen handling go wrong before, and she had learned the humble vocabulary of doubt. Another buzz in Holt's hand. He ignored it for a heartbeat, then answered. This time the voice carried more authority, more consequence. "Captain Holt, this is Mr. Coleman from headquarters. Do not remove the passenger in 2A. Stand by for an executive call." The air seemed to thin. Chloe's shoulders fell by a fraction. Adam lowered his hand from the plastic cuffs. Holt pocketed the handset and squared himself to the row. "Mr. Grant," he said, the title and name both deliberate. If there is any information that would help me end this without harm, now would be the time. Elias studied him for a second that felt like a full turn of the earth. Then he reached for the slim leather case in his brief, moving with the kind of care that reassures startled animals and frightened people alike. "Officers," he said, offering a card, "would you read this for the captain?" Dana took it. Her eyes flicked once, then again. The small inhale she took managed to be both quiet and audible. She passed the card to Adam. His expression changed, not to fear or defensiveness, but to the startled look of a man learning the floor has been a mirror this entire time. Holt didn't reach for the card. He watched Dana's face instead. "What does it say?" Dana's voice found the narrow bridge between firm and reverent. "Elias Grant, chairman of the board." The sentence did not move through the cabin. It settled into it. Sophie's camera shivered, then steadied. A few passengers lowered their phones without meaning to. Others lifted them higher, as if history could be captured by inches. Chloe's lips parted. She didn't speak. Her eyes darted to Elias, then to the captain, then to the carpet, as if truth might be kinder if you met it at a lower altitude. Holt's throat tightened. In a decade of storms and emergencies, he had never felt more aware of the temperature of his own breath. He nodded once, almost to himself, as if accepting a verdict he had already suspected. "Mr. Grant," he said, "thank you for your patience." Elias's answer felt like a door opening. "Captain Holt," he replied, "thank you for listening." The handset buzzed again. Holt lifted it. A new voice, calm, precise, asked to be placed on speaker. He set the phone on the armrest of 2B, tapped a button, and the cabin filled with the unobtrusive authority of a senior executive. "This is Elaine Porter," the voice said. "We are aware of a situation on board. No one will be removed. Mr. Profium Grant will remain in his seat." Sophie whispered into her stream, "We're at the turning point." Elias glanced at his watch, and for the first time since the intercom cracked open the morning, he allowed himself a longer breath. 8 minutes remained until the schedule said they should have been moving. The schedule would not have the last word today. He looked up at Holt, then at Chloe, then at the 2 officers who had come ready to escort him away. "We're all still here," he said quietly. "That's a good start." Somewhere far below the windows, a fuel truck rolled past. Somewhere above the ceiling, filters hummed steady. Inside the cabin, judgment began to loosen its fist, and something else, uncertain, necessary, opened its hand. And as the speaker clicked softly and the executive line held, the story leaned, almost imperceptibly, toward revelation. For a moment, no one spoke. The voice of Elaine Porter, the company's senior vice president, still seemed to hang inside the cabin like a ghost of authority. Passengers stared, unsure whether they'd just witnessed the end of an argument or the start of something much larger. Captain Holt remained still. The phone on the armrest clicked softly as the line disconnected. Then came a ripple of whispers, like leaves rustling when the wind changes direction. Someone exhaled audibly. Someone else muttered, "He's the chairman?" Elias Grant didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the aisle ahead, calm, reflective. He looked less like a man vindicated and more like someone measuring the silence that followed justice delayed. Chloe Navarro, still standing by the service door, felt her pulse flutter under her collar. Her face was pale, her throat dry. "Sir," she said finally, her voice almost cracking. "I didn't know who you were." Elias turned to her gently. "Then why did you assume who I wasn't?" The words landed without force, yet they seemed to pull the air from the room. Chloe looked down, eyes damp, mouth searching for something to say that wouldn't make it worse. "Ms. Navarro," the captain said softly, "take a seat in the galley for now." She nodded, stepping away like someone walking through deep water. Sophie Lang, still live streaming, whispered into her phone. "You're hearing this, right? The guy in 2A is the chairman. She accused him of faking his ticket." Her viewers multiplied, the comment feed an electric storm of outrage and disbelief. The two security officers, Dana Lee and Adam Reyes, remained near the entrance, exchanging glances. "Captain," Dana said quietly. "Orders?" Holt sighed, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "Stand by. The company's handling it directly." He felt a bead of sweat slide down his temple. His uniform, always immaculate, suddenly felt heavy. He turned toward Elias. "Mr. Grant, Elias stopped him with a raised hand. "Captain, you followed procedure. The problem isn't the procedure. It's the eyes interpreting it." That sentence echoed deeper than the sound system ever could. The captain nodded slowly, understanding too well. He'd flown this route for years, seen passengers of every kind, but he'd also seen patterns, tiny, unspoken ones, that now replayed in his memory like unwelcome footage. "May I?" Elias asked, gesturing toward the interphone. Holt hesitated, then nodded. Elias lifted the handset and spoke evenly. "Ms. Porter, are you still on the line?" A pause. Then her voice returned, calm but firm. "Yes, Mr. Grant, we're listening." "Good," Elias said. "Because this isn't just a misunderstanding between two people. It's a lesson our entire airline, and perhaps the entire industry, shouldn't have to keep learning the hard way." Another voice joined the call, lower and commanding. "Mr. Grant, this is Thomas Reed." The captain's stomach tightened. The CEO himself. "Thomas," Elias greeted him, tone composed but edged with disappointment. "I assume you're seeing the broadcast?" "Yes," Reed answered. "It's everywhere." Sophie's camera caught the captain's expression, a mix of disbelief and awe. The idea that a viral video could summon the CEO mid-flight felt surreal. Reed continued. "We're managing communications, but your crew is under pressure. Are you safe?" Elias smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "I'm not unsafe, Thomas. I'm simply being seen." The line went quiet again. Then the CEO said, "Understood. Handle it as you see fit." When the connection ended, the captain looked down the aisle. Passengers avoided his eyes, whispering into their phones, recording fragments of history. He realized he would read about this moment later, in a report he'd have to sign. Elias set the handset down and leaned back in his seat. "Captain Holt," he said, "please resume preparations for takeoff. There's no reason for anyone else to be delayed." Holt blinked. "Are you sure?" "I am," Elias replied. "The sooner we fly, the sooner we can land and fix what grounded us long before this plane ever left the gate." The captain gave a nod, then moved toward the cockpit, his mind heavier than the fuel tanks beneath them. Dana and Adam stayed where they were, unsure whether to salute, apologize, or simply vanish. Dana spoke first. "Sir, for what it's worth, I think you handled yourself with more patience than any of us deserved." Elias nodded. "Patience is free. It just costs more than most people are willing to pay." She managed a small smile and stepped back. From her seat, Sophie whispered again, narrating softly to her audience. He's not angry. That's the wildest part. He's calm. He's making them listen by refusing to shout. The words traveled faster than the plane ever could. A flight attendant in the rear began the safety demonstration, her voice trembling slightly. The cabin followed, seatbelts clicking into place. Elias looked out the window, the morning sun stretching across the tarmac like melted glass. His reflection stared back, half light, half shadow. He thought of all the moments that had brought him here. Meetings where his ideas were credited to others. Polite smiles that hid disbelief. Airport lounges where people handed him their empty cups, mistaking him for staff. He breathed once, deeply. 12 minutes, he murmured to himself. That's how long it takes for truth to reach the surface. The engines whirred louder, a metallic hum that trembled through the cabin floor. The plane rolled back from the gate. Some passengers clapped quietly, eager for normalcy, but no one could quite forget the tension that had burned itself into memory. Chloe watched from the galley, silent. The guilt sat in her chest, like a heavy book she couldn't close. She wanted to apologize, but didn't know how to start. Elias turned slightly in his seat and caught her reflection in the mirror of a service panel. "Ms. Navarro," he said without looking back, "it's not too late to change the story you tell yourself about today." She froze, then whispered, "I'm sorry." He nodded once, still facing forward. "Don't be sorry. Be different." Outside, the sky opened into clear blue. The engines roared, and the plane began to accelerate. From somewhere mid-cabin, Sophie's voice carried softly. "There's no way they'll ever forget this flight." She was right. At 30,000 feet, humility and truth would share the same air pressure. But for now, as the wheels lifted from the ground, the world below seemed smaller, quieter, almost ready to listen. The aircraft climbed toward sunlight. Elias closed his eyes for the first time that morning, letting the sound of the engines drown out everything but the steady rhythm of his watch. It ticked without judgment, counting the seconds between what was and what could be. He opened his eyes again and whispered, almost to himself, "Now the real flight begins." The plane leveled above the clouds, and for a moment, there was peace. The seatbelt sign dimmed, and a golden light spread across the cabin, turning the rows into a corridor of quiet reflection. But beneath that calm hum of engines, something larger was beginning to stir. A meeting that would not take place in any boardroom, but here, 30,000 feet above the world that made it necessary. Captain Raymond Holt stayed inside the cockpit longer than usual. His co-pilot handled routine checks while he stared at the horizon. He'd faced turbulence, hydraulic malfunctions, even lightning once, but nothing like this. What do you do when the storm is made of people's hearts? He finally unbuckled and stepped out, his uniform still perfect but his expression frayed. Passengers looked up as he passed. They weren't angry. They were alert, aware that they were witnesses to something that mattered more than departure time. Elias Grant sat quietly, hands folded, eyes half on the window, half on the reflection within it. When the captain approached, he glanced up. "Captain Holt," he said evenly, "thank you for keeping us steady." The words were kind, but Holt felt the weight of what followed them. He nodded. "Mr. Grant, I owe you more than steady flight." Elias smiled faintly. "You owe me only honesty. The rest will follow." Chloe Navarro stood near the galley, her hands clasped behind her back. She wanted to fade into the wallpaper, But guilt doesn't let people vanish. She watched the two men and waited for some signal of forgiveness. It didn't come. Not yet. Suddenly, the captain's radio crackled. "Captain Holt, this is Operations Control. We're connecting a live video call from headquarters. You're on speaker." His stomach tightened, but he pressed the button anyway. A chime sounded through the intercom, then a calm female voice filled the cabin. "This is Elaine Porter, Senior Vice President of Operations. I'd like to speak with the chairman directly, please." Every head in first class turned toward Elias. He didn't flinch. "Go ahead, Elaine. You're on speaker." "Mr. Grant, we're monitoring live footage from social media. The company's name is trending worldwide. We've issued a preliminary statement acknowledging the incident, but we'll need your direction before final release." The captain's heart sank. He knew corporate language. Preliminary statement always meant damage control. Elias's reply was steady. "Then let's replace damage control with truth control." Elaine paused. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Elias said. "Tell them exactly what happened. A paying passenger was misjudged, not for behavior, but for appearance. Tell them it happened on our airline, under our name, in our uniforms." Holt saw the crew exchange looks of disbelief. This wasn't a man hiding behind legal filters. He was dismantling them. Elaine's voice was careful now. "Understood. The CEO is on the line as well." A deeper voice joined. "Elias, it's Thomas Reed." "Thomas," Elias said softly. "Good to hear you." "I wish it were under different circumstances," the CEO said. "We've all seen the stream. We're preparing for press inquiries." "Good," Elias replied. "Prepare for reform, too." The captain swallowed. He'd never heard an executive speak with that kind of composure while mid-air. Passengers leaned closer to the sound, as if listening to history instead of conversation. "Thomas," Elias continued, "I'm authorizing the immediate implementation of the Equity and Dignity Initiative we drafted last quarter." Elaine's voice broke in. "That program hasn't been approved yet." "It is now," Elias said. "I'm invoking board authority, effective immediately." Even through the intercom, you could hear the shock. Legal procedures, approvals, reviews. Elias had just bypassed them all, but not with arrogance, with purpose. The captain glanced at him. "Sir, forgive me, but can decisions like that be made from here?" Elias met his eyes. "Captain, every great decision begins in the wrong place at the right time." The quote landed with quiet thunder. Sophie Lang whispered into her phone, "He's announcing company reforms while sitting in seat 2A. This is unreal." Elias continued, his tone patient, his words deliberate. "Effective today, all staff, including leadership, will undergo anti-bias retraining. We'll create an independent oversight board, and every discrimination complaint will trigger an external review within 30 days. That's policy now." Elaine hesitated. "Understood, Mr. Grant. I'll notify compliance." "And another thing," Elias added. "We'll publish every quarterly statistic, good or bad. The public deserves to know whether we're learning." The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was awe. Even the engines seemed to hum softer, as if listening. Chloe's knees felt weak. She realized she was standing in the middle of the very change she'd made necessary. She wanted to cry, but she held her composure. Tears, she knew, wouldn't fix anything. Holt cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant, if I may ask, why handle this here? You could have waited." Elias turned to the captain, his eyes steady. Because waiting is what got us here. The longer injustice sits quietly, the louder it becomes when it finally speaks. He glanced toward Chloe. Sometimes the lesson has to happen in front of witnesses. From row 4, Sophie spoke softly to her viewers. He's not angry, he's teaching. This isn't revenge, it's a mirror. Elaine's voice came through again. Understood, Mr. Grant. I'll ensure your directives are carried out immediately. Press will want a statement from you. They'll have it, Elias replied. After we land. The intercom clicked off. For a moment, only the sound of air moving past the fuselage remained. Elias exhaled slowly and turned toward the other passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice low but clear, you've witnessed more than a delay. You've witnessed a pattern we all live inside, and you've also seen what happens when someone decides not to accept it quietly. No one clapped. No one spoke. But something shifted in the air. Respect, maybe, or awakening. Even those who had rolled their eyes an hour ago now stared at him like he had somehow rearranged gravity. The captain stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mr. Grant, for what it's worth, I think you just changed this airline. Elias smiled, weary but sincere. One flight at a time, Captain. That's how all journeys start. Outside, the sky stretched endless and unjudging. The light through the window made his reflection almost transparent, blending his face with the clouds beyond it. Inside the cabin, Chloe finally found her courage. She took a deep breath and spoke, not to him, but to everyone. For what I said earlier, I was wrong. I judged someone by what I saw, not who they were, and I don't want to be that person again. The apology wasn't elegant, but it was real. Elias turned, nodded once, and said quietly, "Then you've already begun your training." A few passengers chuckled softly, not mockingly, but in relief. The captain returned to the cockpit, and the hum of the engines rose again, steady and strong. Sophie whispered to her camera, 30,000 feet above the earth, a company just changed its soul. Outside, a thin layer of clouds parted, revealing the desert below, a stretch of endless copper light. Inside, something far rarer had cleared, the weight that comes from pretending not to see. And as the sun streamed through the windows, Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Now, he murmured, we can begin to descend with purpose. The captain's voice murmured over the intercom, soft and steady as a lullaby. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now cruising at 31,000 feet. You may move about the cabin. The seatbelt sign dimmed with a faint chime, and the usual rustle of travel, cups clinking, whispers rising, tried to reclaim the quiet. But it couldn't. What had unfolded earlier still hovered in the air, too vivid to dissolve into routine. Elias Grant sat motionless, gazing out at the thin clouds stretching like soft white rivers below. From this height, the world looked peaceful, almost innocent. He knew better. Truth rarely showed itself from the ground. It needed distance, perspective, and silence. Chloe Navarro sat in the jump seat behind the galley curtain, knees drawn together, eyes unfocused. Her mind replayed the words she'd said, words she couldn't believe had left her lips. People like him. The sound echoed again and again, smaller each time, but no less painful. She thought of the training sessions she'd taken, the cheerful slides about diversity, the polite applause at the end. None of them had reached her the way this flight had. She wanted to apologize again, but something told her not to rush it. Real apologies aren't sentences, they're changes. Elias leaned back, checking his watch not for time but for rhythm. He'd been in boardrooms his whole life, rooms filled with people who spoke loudly about fairness but whispered when it demanded cost. For months he'd prepared this moment, a test designed not to humiliate but to reveal. He hadn't expected it to unravel quite so vividly, but perhaps that was the point. Truth, when trapped, doesn't escape politely. He opened his briefcase, revealing a single leather folder. Inside lay documents marked in gold letters: Equity and Dignity Audit. Confidential. He flipped through the pages quietly, scanning numbers, complaints, and responses. 47 incidents of discrimination reported in the last quarter alone. 47 doors closed in silence. He read each one with care, a ledger of wounds written in corporate language. Sophie Lang had stopped live streaming. Her phone battery was nearly gone, and she'd switched to notes, writing by instinct, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts. She'd come onto this flight planning to record lighthearted travel content. Instead, she was capturing a story that could change lives. Her viewers had sent messages by the thousands, people thanking her for keeping the camera steady, for showing what most only whispered about. The comments were still rolling in. He handled it like a king. That woman needs to be fired. This is why we film. But what stuck with Sophie wasn't the outrage. It was the quiet dignity in Elias's restraint. When the flight attendant in the rear offered refreshments, she declined. "Not yet," she whispered. "The story's still writing itself." From the cockpit, Captain Holt glanced back through the door's small glass window. His co-pilot was handling the controls, but Holt's thoughts were anchored in row 1. He'd flown with hundreds of attendants over the years, some kind, some curt, all human. He couldn't stop thinking about the pattern he'd ignored, the way certain passengers received double checks, second glances, polite doubts. He'd told himself it wasn't his place to question those small habits. Now he knew silence was a form of participation. He switched to the intercom frequency that reached the crew area. "Chloe," he said quietly, "take a break. I'll handle service for a few minutes." There was a pause. Then her voice came, small and shaken. "Thank you, Captain." He didn't answer. Some lessons needed space. Elias continued reading. At the back of the folder was a draft press release dated for that very morning. South Skies Airlines announces comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative following internal investigation. The details were precise: mandatory retraining for every employee, third-party audits, and a $10 million fund for community equity programs. The only thing missing was the trigger event, the story that would make it impossible to ignore. He had been waiting for one honest moment to light the fuse. And now, there it was, broadcast to the world by a stranger with a phone. He smiled, not out of pride, but relief. Sometimes change needed a scandal to wake up. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Grant?" It was Dana Lee, the security officer. She stood at the end of the aisle, cautious but composed. "May I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," Elias said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. She sat, adjusting her belt, looking uncomfortable in the civilian stillness of a passenger seat. "I wanted to say thank you," she began, "for not escalating earlier. It could have gone very differently." Elias nodded. "It almost did." "I've been in this job 8 years," Dana continued, "and I've seen passengers removed for less. It's not always racism. Sometimes it's just fear. But fear is its own disguise, isn't it?" "It is," Elias said softly. "And it dresses well." She looked at him, puzzled, then smiled faintly. "That's a good line." He turned to the window again. It's also a sad one. They sat quietly for a moment, the hum of the engines filling the space between them. Then Dana asked, "Was this flight really a test?" Elias didn't answer right away. He traced a finger along the edge of the folder before closing it. "Yes," he said finally. "A test, but not of them, of us." Dana nodded slowly. "And we failed." "Failure isn't final," Elias said. "It's data. What we do next decides whether it becomes progress or just another headline." She stood, her expression thoughtful. "Well, for what it's worth, I'll be better for it." She gave a small nod of respect and returned to her post. Elias watched her go, feeling the faintest sense of hope. Change often began with the people who hadn't planned on leading it. A chime sounded as the captain's voice filled the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Phoenix in about 40 minutes. Please remain seated as we prepare for landing." Elias folded his hands again. The watch on his wrist caught the afternoon sun, glinting like a signal. He thought of all the people who would see the headlines before they slept tonight, of the conversations that would begin at dinner tables, and of the discomfort that would follow and heal. In the galley, Chloe watched the reflection of the clouds on the coffee pot. They looked like moving ghosts, soft and restless. She whispered to no one, "I don't want to be afraid of seeing anymore." It wasn't a confession, just a promise. Sophie, now typing furiously, wrote her final line before closing her laptop. The chairman didn't expose the airline. The airline exposed itself. He just stayed seated long enough for the truth to stand up. Outside, the plane began its slow descent. Phoenix shimmered in the distance, gold against the pale desert. The cabin tilted slightly, and light pooled across Elias's lap like a quiet blessing. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Let's see what lands with us." The world waited below, and so did the next chapter of its conscience. The first sign of descent came not from the captain's voice, but from the change in sound. The pitch of the engines softened, a subtle hum like the breath before confession. Below the clouds, the desert waited, shimmering in the late afternoon sun. Inside the cabin, a different kind of descent had already begun. Elias Grant closed the folder on his lap and placed it back into his briefcase. The test was over, but the results were still unfolding. He reached for his phone and turned off airplane mode. Messages poured in instantly, news alerts, corporate notifications, calls from reporters. He ignored them all, except one. It was from Elaine Porter. "We're monitoring live coverage. Stock is down 7% in the last hour." He read the message twice, then typed a simple reply. That's the cost of honesty. Across the aisle, Sophie Lang looked up from her notepad, noticing the faint smile on his face. "Bad news?" she asked softly. "Necessary news," Elias said. "Sometimes truth comes with a market correction." Sophie chuckled quietly, the tension easing for a moment. "You talk like this isn't a crisis." "It's not," he replied. "It's an audit of conscience. Numbers will recover faster than integrity if we protect it." The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Holt. We've begun our descent into Phoenix. Please remain seated and fasten your belts." The cabin responded with a rustle of motion. Seatbelts snapping, windows opening, the rhythm of habit returning. Yet underneath, everyone knew they were landing into something bigger than a city. They were landing into consequence. Chloe Navarro sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly. She'd been silent since her apology, afraid that speaking might undo what little grace she had left. Her mind replayed every moment, the disbelief on passengers' faces, the quiet power in Elias's calm voice, the shock when the truth unfolded. She wondered how a few careless words could dismantle 8 years of service. But perhaps, she thought, it wasn't the words themselves, it was what they revealed. Elias turned to her gently. "Ms. Navarro," he said, and she flinched at the sound of her name. "Do you know what turbulence really is?" She looked confused. "It's unstable air, isn't it?" "Partly," Elias said, "but at its core, turbulence is a correction. It happens when air masses moving at different speeds meet and struggle to coexist. It feels violent, but it's nature's way of balancing itself. What happened today is turbulence, not collapse." Chloe's eyes softened. "I don't know if I can come back from this." "You can," Elias said, "if you fly through it instead of trying to go around." The words lingered between them. She nodded slowly, her lips trembling, but not with fear. "Thank you," she whispered. Before Elias could answer, the captain's radio buzzed again. He listened briefly, frowned, then spoke through the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay seated. We've received notice of heavy traffic over Phoenix. We'll be entering a short holding pattern." The aircraft leveled again, circling above the copper desert. Passengers murmured restlessly. Sophie looked out the window and gasped softly. Below, a line of flashing lights stretched along the runway. News vans, police cars, and camera crews. "They're waiting for you," she said. Elias nodded. "I expected they would. Doesn't that bother you?" He smiled faintly. "I'd be more bothered if they weren't." She tilted her head. "You really planned all this, didn't you?" "Not the faces or the feelings," Elias said. "But the truth needed a place to be seen. Today it chose this plane." Chloe stared at him in quiet disbelief. "You mean this was all intentional?" "Not your reaction," he said softly. "But the opportunity. I've been carrying that folder for months, waiting for a moment when policy met reality, and today they shook hands." Sophie whispered, "That's incredible. You turned humiliation into a strategy." Elias shook his head. "No, I turned silence into a story." From the cockpit, Captain Holt's voice came again, softer now. "Mr. Grant, this is the captain. We've just received an update from operations. The press is reporting your directives as official policy. The stock has fallen 9%. Headquarters wants to confirm if they should hold or proceed." Elias pressed the intercom button beside his seat. "Proceed," he said. "A little turbulence never broke a plane, but denial always has." A ripple of laughter spread quietly among nearby passengers. Even the captain smiled faintly in the cockpit. Down below, the skyline of Phoenix drew nearer, glowing under the desert haze. The pilot adjusted course, beginning the final approach. The plane trembled slightly, and Chloe gripped her armrest. Elias glanced at her. "You're safe," he said. "Turbulence isn't punishment. It's proof we're moving." She managed a small, grateful smile. "You make everything sound like philosophy." "It's easier to forgive when we understand the lesson," Elias replied. Sophie scribbled those words in her notebook immediately. A notification blinked on Elias's phone again. Another message from Elaine. "Board convening emergency meeting. CEO requesting your statement for investors." He typed back slowly. "They'll hear it soon enough. Live." The plane jolted softly as landing gear unfolded beneath them. The sound echoed through the floor like the click of destiny locking into place. Passengers leaned forward instinctively. The captain's voice returned, calm but edged with meaning. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival." Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, every rock and shadow painted in gold. Inside, the passengers stared at the man who had changed the course of a corporation by sitting still. The wheels touched down with a firm thud, the kind that feels final but freeing. Applause broke out. Not the usual tired clap of relief, but something warmer, respectful, uncertain of what it meant, yet sure that it mattered. As they taxied toward the gate, Elias looked out at the crowd of cameras waiting beyond the glass. "They'll want sound bites," he murmured. "But today doesn't need noise. It needs reflection." He closed his briefcase, adjusting his cuffs with quiet precision. Then he turned to Chloe. "When they ask about today, tell them the truth. Not the version that protects you, the version that redeems you." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I will." The engine slowed, the cabin lights brightened, and a new kind of silence settled. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the stillness that follows awakening, the moment before apology turns into action. Outside, the jet bridge extended toward them, a silver arm reaching across distance. Inside, hearts were already beginning to cross their own. The moment the landing gear retracted and the city lights disappeared beneath a sea of gold clouds, the cabin began to change. The air felt heavier now, as if everyone could sense that the real turbulence wasn't in the sky, but in what waited below. Elias Grant sat with his tablet open on the tray before him. The numbers flickered quietly, lines of red creeping downward across the stock chart. He didn't flinch. The soft hum of the engines matched the calm rhythm of his breath. The headline above the graph read, "South Skies Airlines, down 7% in under 1 hour." Chloe Navarro sat 2 seats away, her hands clasped so tightly they left small crescents in her skin. When Elias spoke, his tone was almost kind. "It's falling faster than expected," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Chloe turned her head. "Because of this? Because of me?" He looked at her, steady and unshaken. "Not because of you, because of us. Every unchecked bias costs more than money. The world is just seeing the invoice for the first time." She lowered her eyes, blinking hard. "I never meant to cause all this." "I know," Elias said. "Intentions rarely start fires. It's friction that does." The captain's intercom clicked. "Mr. Grant, this is Captain Holt. Operations is on the line. May I patch the call through to your seat?" Elias pressed the small silver button. "Go ahead." A moment later, the low baritone of Thomas Reed, the CEO, filled the cabin speakers. "Elias, it's Thomas. We're looking at a major hit. Investors are nervous. The board is convening within the hour." Elias replied, "Good. Let them meet with open eyes for once." Thomas hesitated. "We're also receiving internal reports. The flight attendant and captain involved will be temporarily suspended pending review. HR recommends immediate removal." Elias glanced toward Chloe, her face drained of color. "No," he said. "Suspension isn't accountability. It's avoidance." Thomas's voice tightened. "Then what do you suggest?" Elias's eyes softened, though his words remained precise. "Give them a choice. Redemption or repetition. They can walk away, or they can help us fix what they helped expose." The line was silent for a beat. Then the CEO said quietly, "That's bold, even for you." "Bold is what honesty looks like in public," Elias replied. The intercom clicked off, leaving the cabin in stillness once more. The passengers who had been pretending not to listen were suddenly aware of the conversation's gravity. They watched Elias the way one watches a teacher in a classroom that suddenly feels personal. Sophie Lang turned her phone slightly toward her, recording a quiet commentary for her audience. He just told the CEO not to punish them, but to let them lead reform. I've never seen anyone hold power like that, without raising his voice. From the cockpit, the captain's voice returned, low and measured. Mr. Grant, we've been given clearance to begin our descent. 30 minutes to landing. Elias nodded. 30 minutes, he murmured. That's enough time to decide who we're going to be when the wheels touch down. He turned to Chloe again. You'll have to speak to the press when we land. They'll ask for your version. What will you tell them? Her throat tightened. That I misjudged you. That's true, Elias said, but it's not enough. The world doesn't need another apology. It needs an education. Tell them what taught you. She looked up. What did teach me? He smiled gently. The difference between seeing a seat number and seeing a person. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun dipped into a warm haze, scattering the light like amber over the desert. The plane tilted slightly as it changed course. The vibration through the floor was barely noticeable, yet Chloe's hands still trembled against her knees. Breathe, Elias said softly. Turbulence feels worse when you fight it. She exhaled, trying to steady herself. You really don't hate me, do you? Hate? He echoed. No, hate is too easy. I reserve my energy for building things that last. The engines hummed lower as the aircraft began its slow descent. Through the small oval windows, the passengers could see patches of desert towns appearing beneath the fading clouds. Someone in the rear murmured about the crowd of news vans already waiting at the airport. The captain made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll arrive shortly. Please remain seated as we approach final descent. Elias looked at his tablet one last time. The line had dropped even further, 9% now, nearly $1 billion in value. He locked the screen and slipped it away. Let them measure the loss in dollars, he said quietly. I'll measure it in decency. Sophie leaned forward, still writing. What will you tell the cameras when we land? Nothing rehearsed, Elias said. Truth doesn't need a script. The light outside shifted again, a soft orange flooding the cabin. Passengers tilted their heads to watch as the horizon glowed. Chloe stared out too, her eyes following the edges of the desert like she was seeing the world for the first time. You know, Elias said after a moment, when air moves violently, pilots call it instability. But the word doesn't mean danger, it means change. The sky is rearranging itself. So are we. Chloe's lips parted as she absorbed his words. And after we land? He smiled faintly. After we land, you tell the truth. The rest will find its way. The plane trembled softly. The landing gear unlocked beneath them with a hollow thud. From the cockpit, the captain's calm voice echoed again, carrying both duty and something like reverence. Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. The descent grew steeper. Through the window, flashes of light appeared. Camera flashes from the runway. Blue and red reflections from waiting vehicles. Silhouettes of reporters clustered near the terminal. The story that had begun as a misunderstanding was now a national mirror. Chloe took a deep breath. They'll hate me, she whispered. Elias shook his head. They'll see themselves in you. That's what frightens people most about honesty. It's contagious. The tires touched the runway with a soft roar. The impact rippled through the cabin, a pulse that felt both final and forgiving. Passengers clapped again, but this time it wasn't just for the landing. It was for the lesson they'd witnessed. Elias turned to Chloe as the plane slowed. "Remember," he said gently, "sometimes redemption begins at the lowest altitude." She nodded, eyes wet, voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on me." He smiled. No one grows from being thrown away. Outside, the airport lights glowed like embers in the dusk. The jet bridge crept toward them, slow and deliberate, as if even the machinery understood that this arrival was different. Inside, people unbuckled their seatbelts without rushing, careful not to break the quiet miracle that had settled over them. As the engines wound down, Elias folded his hands and looked out the window once more. The runway gleamed under the twilight, a perfect reflection of what he'd always believed. Sometimes you have to lose altitude to find clarity. The aircraft came to a stop at the gate, but no one stood. The seatbelt sign pinged off, yet every passenger seemed suspended in the same quiet moment. The one where a story finishes its sentence, but not its meaning. Elias Grant sat back in seat 2A, letting the stillness breathe. The hum of the engines faded until it was replaced by something softer. The murmur of people who had witnessed truth unfold at 30,000 feet and weren't sure how to return to ordinary life. Captain Raymond Holt stayed in the cockpit, staring at the control panel as if the switches could offer absolution. His hands hovered over the levers, steady by habit, but trembling beneath. The flight that had started as routine had become a mirror. He saw his own reflection in the glass of the instrument panel, fractured by blinking lights. It was a reflection he could no longer ignore. He released a long breath and switched the intercom to private. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice lower than usual, "before you deplane, may I speak with you?" Elias looked up at the small red light above his seat, then pressed the button. "Of course, Captain." Holt appeared a moment later at the front of the cabin. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes were tired, his face lined with the weight of what had just happened. Passengers watched him in silence as he approached Elias. "Sir," Holt began, standing straight, "I owe you a confession." Elias turned slightly in his seat. "I'm listening." The captain's voice trembled, not with fear, but with truth finally leaving confinement. "My son," he said, "is biracial. He's 16. He has my mother's eyes and his mother's skin. And this morning, before I left for the airport, I told him that the world is fair if you work hard enough. I don't know if I still believe that." Elias regarded him quietly. "You've believed it long enough to want it to be true. That's not failure. It's hope." "But what if someone treats him the way I treated you?" Holt asked. His voice cracked on the word "someone." Elias lowered his tone. "Then you have a reason to make the skies safer for him." The captain looked down. "I've been flying 23 years. I thought I knew how to protect people. Turns out I was just keeping order, not justice." Elias stood, slow and deliberate. Justice and order look similar from a distance. You only see the difference when it happens to you. Chloe Navarro, standing behind them, listened silently. The captain turned to her, not with anger but sorrow. "Ms. Navarro," he said, "you're part of this story too. How are you holding up?" She swallowed. "Trying to learn without hiding," she whispered. "I thought doing my job meant following procedure. I didn't realize procedure could be prejudice wearing a badge." Elias nodded. "Then perhaps your next job is teaching others what that looks like." Holt blinked. Teaching? Yes, Elias said. The both of you. I'm establishing a new training series for all crew, the Holt Navarro Protocol. You'll lead it together. Chloe's eyes widened. Me? After all this? Exactly because of this, Elias said. People don't change when they're punished. They change when they're trusted with a better story. The captain's voice softened. What would we even teach? Elias smiled faintly. Start with what it felt like to be wrong, and what it took to listen. The two of them exchanged a glance, unsure whether it was forgiveness or disbelief. But something unspoken passed between them, a fragile piece that needed no signature. Outside the cabin, movement began again. The door opened with a soft, hydraulic sigh, and the hum of the jet bridge filtered in. Uniformed officials appeared at the entrance, one in a dark coat with a gold badge pinned neatly on the chest. Mr. Grant, the man said, extending a hand. Inspector Mason Lee, Federal Transportation Authority. His tone carried neither threat nor apology, just duty wrapped in respect. We've been assigned to review today's incident. We'll need a statement. Elias gestured to his briefcase. It's already written. 6 months of preparation. Today just added the final chapter. Mason accepted the folder, scanning the first few pages. You anticipated something like this? I anticipated silence, Elias said. I just didn't expect it to break so loudly. The inspector nodded, a hint of admiration in his expression. We'll handle the review discreetly. Thank you for your cooperation. When he turned to leave, Elias stopped him gently. Inspector, may I ask one favor? Of course. Don't let this end as a headline. Make it a handbook. Mason gave a small, approving smile. That's the first time I've heard someone ask for more paperwork, Mr. Grant. Elias returned the smile. Some paperwork saves lives. The inspector nodded again and stepped out of the cabin, the folder tucked under his arm. For a long moment, no one spoke. The passengers, the crew, even the captain, all stood suspended in that fragile intersection between consequence and compassion. Finally, Chloe whispered, You really planned every part of this? Elias shook his head. Not the people. I only planned the opportunity for truth to show up. The rest belonged to you. The captain reached out his hand. Sir, I don't expect forgiveness. Elias shook it firmly. Forgiveness isn't given. It's practiced. Keep practicing. Outside, the night had deepened. Through the windows, the runway lights stretched into the distance. Blue, red, white, like threads weaving through darkness. The reflection of those lights shimmered across the fuselage, softening the hard edges of metal and pride alike. Chloe watched as passengers began to gather their belongings, quieter than usual, their eyes softer. They had witnessed a transformation too intimate to name. Sophie stood near the door, camera lowered, no longer recording. I think I'll stop filming now, she said. Some moments should rest. Elias nodded approvingly. That's the difference between exposure and understanding. The last passengers stepped off the plane. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, leaving a warm glow. The captain lingered, gazing out at the night skyline of Phoenix beyond the terminal glass. It's strange, Holt said quietly. I've flown hundreds of landings, but this one feels like the first that actually touched ground. Elias smiled. Then maybe that's where the next flight begins. They stood there in shared silence, watching as the jet bridge disconnected. The engines cooled, their metallic ticking the only sound. like a heart settling after a long race. Outside, red and blue lights from airport security flickered against the hull, mingling with the city's own golden glow. Inside, everyone breathed easier. The cost of the day, lost hours, shaken pride, the market's panic, would all fade eventually. But what would remain was the quieter expense, the human cost that couldn't be measured by numbers, the realization of how much trust it takes to look at someone and see them clearly for the first time. Elias turned once more toward the window, his reflection merging with the city lights beyond. "Every system has a price," he murmured, "but awareness is the only currency that grows when you spend it." The captain heard him and nodded slowly. "Then we're richer than we were this morning." And for the first time that day, they both smiled, not in relief, but in understanding. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the story finally rested, not as an ending, but as a beginning wrapped in quiet purpose. 3 months later, the sky above Phoenix looked the same, bright, endless, and busy. But inside the headquarters of South Skies Airlines, something fundamental had shifted. The air no longer hummed with the old rhythm of polite avoidance. Conversations that once stopped when truth entered the room now continued, quieter but braver. Elias Grant walked through the glass corridors of the corporate building, watching as sunlight danced across the polished floors. Behind the meeting rooms, screens displayed new training modules, and every wall bore the company's renewed mission statement. "Service begins where judgment ends." The letters glowed in brushed silver, not as decoration, but as daily reminder. Downstairs, in a wide conference room, a group of new recruits sat facing the stage. At the front stood two familiar faces, Captain Raymond Holt and Chloe Navarro. They were different now, not in uniform but in presence. They carried the kind of calm that only follows a storm. Chloe adjusted the microphone, hands steady. "3 months ago," she began, "I made a mistake that went viral around the world. But what the world saw wasn't the whole story. They saw my words. They didn't see the silence that shaped them." The audience listened, still and intent. "I thought I was doing my job," she continued, "checking tickets, following rules, keeping order. What I didn't realize was that order without empathy isn't safety, it's control. That day, I learned that serving people means seeing them." She paused, her gaze scanning the young faces in front of her. "I can't undo what I said, but I can use it. That's why I'm here. To remind you that policy protects the company, but compassion protects everyone else." Soft applause filled the room. Captain Holt stepped beside her, voice low and deliberate. "I was the captain on that flight. I should have known better. For years, I told myself that fairness was automatic in uniform. It isn't. Fairness has to be practiced every single day, every single flight." He looked at Chloe, then at the recruits. "That's why we created this training program, the Holt-Navarro Protocol. It's not about blame. It's about flight safety for the human spirit. Because if prejudice can ground a person, it can ground a company too." The recruits clapped again, some nodding with quiet resolve. From the back of the room, Elias watched them speak. His hands were folded loosely behind him, pride mixing with humility. He'd seen companies change policies before, but this time was different. The change was alive, speaking through the very people who once needed it most. When the session ended, the recruits gathered around Chloe and Holt, asking questions. One young woman asked how to recognize bias before it spoke. Chloe smiled and said, "When you find yourself explaining why someone doesn't belong, That's the moment you've already forgotten what belonging means. Outside the conference room, Elias's assistant, Naomi Chen, approached quietly, tablet in hand. "Mr. Grant, I've compiled the quarterly report," she said. "Complaints have dropped by more than 80% since the new program began." Elias nodded slowly. "Numbers aren't everything, but this time they sound like healing." Naomi smiled. "There's something else you should see." She handed him a printed email. "It came this morning." He unfolded the paper. The subject line read, "Thank you from Seat 14C." The message began simply, "Dear Mr. Grant, I was on a South Skies flight last week with my daughter. Another passenger complained that we were speaking too loudly in Spanish. Before I could respond, a flight attendant, Ms. Navarro herself, stepped in. She reminded the passenger that courtesy is not a language, it's a choice. I wanted you to know that because of her, I didn't feel small, I felt seen. Thank you for building a company that listens. Sincerely, Grace Turner." Elias read the email twice, his lips curving into a small smile. Grace Turner, a name he didn't know, yet somehow recognized. There were thousands like her, each carrying small moments of redemption that would never make headlines, but would travel farther than any viral video ever could. He forwarded the message to Sophie Lang, adding a short note. "This is what comes after the recording stops." A few minutes later, Sophie replied with a photograph. Rows of laptops and cameras inside a small community studio. She had founded something new, the Dignity Documentation Project. Its logo was simple, an open eye surrounded by a circle of light. Her caption read, "We're teaching travelers how to film safely, report fairly, and stand up without shouting. Justice doesn't always need volume, it just needs visibility." Elias leaned back in his chair, the faint sound of laughter from the training room drifting through the hallway. It was the sound of a company learning how to breathe again. That evening, as sunset poured across Phoenix in gold and rose, Elias walked through the terminal of the city airport. He liked to visit unnoticed, a quiet observer of the world he had helped reshape. He saw it everywhere now, in the way attendants greeted passengers by name, in the way people offered to switch seats for families, in the way silence no longer carried suspicion. Near one gate, he spotted Chloe, out of uniform, reading to a child waiting to board. The child giggled as Chloe made airplane noises with her hands. Elias smiled to himself and walked on. At another gate, Captain Holt stood with two trainees, explaining emergency procedures. "Every checklist begins with empathy," he said, half joking but entirely true. Elias stopped near a window overlooking the runway. A plane was taxiing into position, its lights blinking like small promises. He whispered to himself, "Every journey deserves safe passage, even the invisible ones." A gentle chime sounded on his phone. A new message notification. Another email. He opened it and found words that made him pause. "Dear Mr. Grant, I saw a stranger being spoken to unfairly in a store today. I remembered your story, and for once I didn't stay silent. I told the clerk to stop. It worked. Thank you for reminding me that silence helps no one." The sender's name was Grace Turner again, the same woman from the flight. This time, her message wasn't about being defended. It was about defending someone else. Elias smiled, feeling a warmth settle inside him. The ripples were spreading. One person at a time, one small courage at a time. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the sounds of the terminal wash over him. The rolling of suitcases, the soft echo of announcements, the rhythm of movement. For once, everything felt aligned. He whispered, "The world is still turbulent, but maybe we're learning to fly through it." Outside the window, another plane lifted into the fading light. Its shadow stretched across the runway, then disappeared into the sky, proof that even shadows can move toward brightness when guided well. Night settled over Phoenix like a soft curtain drawn across the sky. The city lights glowed beneath it, steady, deliberate, like 1,000 little beacons tracing paths through the dark. From his corner office at South Sky's headquarters, Elias Grant stood by the window, watching the lights shimmer across the horizon. They reminded him of runway lamps, guiding planes toward safe landings, or perhaps guiding people toward better beginnings. On the table behind him sat a small silver frame, a photo from that fateful flight, printed from a still frame of Sophie Lang's video. In it, he sat calm amid the chaos, Chloe standing frozen, Captain Holt stepping forward, and phones lifted high like witnesses. Beneath the photo, a single line he'd written himself: "Dignity doesn't make noise, it makes change." His phone buzzed on the desk. A notification pulsed gently on the screen. Sophie's name, followed by a short message: "Live now from Cafe Meridian. You might want to watch this." Elias smiled faintly and tapped the link. The live video opened to the soft sounds of a late-night cafe, clinking cups, low jazz humming through an old speaker. Sophie Lang sat at a corner table, her camera angled toward the entrance. "Tonight's story," she said softly, "isn't about a plane. It's about a choice." The viewers watching live were few at first, but climbing quickly. Behind her, a young man in a delivery uniform was being scolded by a manager, his voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "You're late again," the man said. "You people never show up on time." Sophie kept the camera steady but didn't zoom in. "You're hearing it," she whispered. "It's happening again, different place, same assumption." The manager turned, realizing people were watching. "Mind your own business," he snapped. Sophie spoke softly, her tone calm but unwavering. "Sir, I am. My business is dignity." The cafe fell silent. After a moment, the manager muttered an apology and walked away. The young worker blinked, unsure what had just happened, then whispered a thank you that barely reached her microphone. Sophie looked back at the camera. That's all it takes sometimes. A small voice at the right volume. Elias's reflection in the office window smiled faintly. The comment count on Sophie's stream began to climb. First a few hundred, then thousands. He picked up his keyboard and opened the company's official social feed. In the caption bar, he typed slowly, carefully, as if writing to everyone and no one at once. 6 months ago, I sat in seat 2A on a flight from Dallas to Phoenix. I didn't change the world that day. You did. Every person who chose to listen, to record, to speak, to forgive, you all became part of the flight that never really ended. He paused, watching the blinking cursor, then continued. Every time someone stands up for what's right, justice climbs a little higher above the clouds. Every time we choose empathy instead of silence, the world grows lighter by a few degrees. He pressed publish. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then the numbers began to rise. 1,000 viewers, 10,000, 50,000. Comments flooded in from around the world. Pilots, flight attendants, passengers, even teenagers who had seen Sophie's clips and found courage in them. Seat 2A changed my perspective. I work ground crew. We watch your training video every morning. My son showed this to his school. They started a kindness challenge. Elias read each one with quiet gratitude. Outside, the faint roar of a plane taking off reached the office window. Its lights rose slowly, lifting into the same night sky he'd been watching all evening. He followed its climb with his eyes until it became a single dot among the stars. Naomi Chen, his assistant, stepped into the room. "Long day, sir?" Elias smiled. "Long year, but a good one." She glanced at the screen showing Sophie's broadcast, still live, the viewer count now well past 100,000. "She's become quite the journalist," Naomi said. "She was always that," Elias replied. "She just needed a story worth staying awake for." Naomi nodded, then hesitated. "Do you ever think about that flight? About what it cost?" Elias turned from the window and sat back at his desk. "Every day," he said softly. "But I think about what it gave more." He picked up a pen and opened his journal, a simple black notebook with pages filled by steady, looping handwriting. On a new page, he wrote, "True altitude is measured not in feet, but in empathy." Naomi read the line and smiled. "You should post that." He shook his head. "Some words are better left to be found." She nodded, closing the door quietly behind her. The office returned to silence, the kind of silence that feels earned. Outside, the city lights shimmered, some steady, some flickering. Elias thought of every person he'd met since that day. The captain who'd learned humility, the attendant who'd learned courage, the passengers who'd learned to look closer, the stranger named Grace who'd learned to speak up. He whispered their names under his breath, like a small prayer of gratitude. Then he whispered the last name, his own, and smiled, realizing he too had been learning all along. A soft chime from his computer interrupted the moment. The company's internal network had updated its banner with a quote he hadn't approved, but recognized instantly. It read, "Sometimes justice arrives 30,000 feet in the air. But real change begins when we decide silence is no longer safe." He leaned back, letting the words wash over him. The narrator's voice, the one that had followed him all his life, the voice of reason, the voice of compassion, seemed to echo the line in his mind. Sometimes justice travels by plane, sometimes by word, sometimes just by heart, but it always travels. Outside, the latest departing flight reached its cruising altitude, its lights glimmering far above the city. Elias watched until the plane became a faint star, then whispered into the quiet room, "Keep flying." He didn't mean the aircraft. He meant everyone who had found their wings that day. The clock on his desk ticked softly, steady, reassuring, infinite. Wherever he was meant to go next, he knew the path had already begun. Not in airports or meetings, but in the hearts of people who had learned, at last, to see one another clearly. The camera on Sophie's stream faded to black, her final words whispering through the speakers like a benediction. Wherever you are tonight, remember, dignity is not negotiable. If this story touched you, share it, and let kindness travel farther than cruelty. Elias closed his eyes, the city humming below like a living heartbeat. Somewhere beyond that skyline, another plane lifted into the air, another chance to get it right, another ordinary flight waiting to become extraordinary. And above all of it, the stars shimmered, quiet witnesses to a truth that no turbulence could shake. Justice, once awakened, never lands the same way twice.